everybody really knows how important voting is.
Gotta do our civic duty.
It's not because of the papers that we are American. It's a decision of really being a part of everything that we live in.
As those states fall down on the red or the blue column, we might get a good idea of how this is going.
It's unpredictable.
The best poll you have is election day.
We know where we stand on these issues, and now we're at the point where we can take action on those issues.
I'm helping this community, and that's big to me.
Voting means that we have a choice, so when you have that choice, make that choice.
This is the KENS 5 Voters Guide to Election 2020.
Good evening and welcome to the special election edition of KENS 5 Eyewitness News. I'm Sharon Coe. With just 5 days to go, we want to be your guide to everything election 2020. We'll dive into a handful of topics, including why this election is so important, voting across the nation, candidates and campaign ads, what to expect on election night, and who decides the winner if a vote is too close to call. We talk to the experts, hear from a first-time voter, and even dive into the fun stuff, like the history behind the famous I voted sticker. But first, there are two key dates to remember. If you're planning on casting your ballot early, tomorrow is the deadline. The polls are still open for a few more hours tonight. Tomorrow they open at 8 a.m. and close at 10 p.m. The other date is obvious, Election Day. This is the last chance you get to make your voice heard. And if you plan on voting by mail, send your ballot in immediately. You can also hand it over in person at the Bexar County Elections Office to make sure it arrives on time. It's a statement that's been thrown around for months now. This election is expected to be the most important yet. Joining us now is political science professor Sharon Novato at UTSA, who is here to talk about this. Sharon, let's get right to it. What is your take? Is this the most important election?
Every presidential election is important. Why? Because we elect someone so infrequently every 4 years. And it's a way for us to define the trajectory of the country. It's also used as a phrase to ignite the base or undecided voters. In other words, it's planting a question in their mind. Do you feel comfortable with the way the country is moving? And if so, then you continue to vote for the current administration. If you feel that things could change, possibly for the better, or you're looking for a different outlook as a voter, then you're going to vote for the opposition. Right now, there's a lot of insecurity, both economically and health-wise, and that weighs heavily on the voters.
About the past 2 decades, Hispanic voters are increasingly becoming a large share of the electorate in states, and this is especially true in southwestern states like Texas, and this is according to the Pew Research Center. So how will this play a role, in your opinion, in the election?
This is incredibly important. There are 60 million Latinos in the country right now. There are 32 million eligible Latino voters. That makes up about 13.3% of the population. It's not a monolithic group by any stretch of the means, but if we're talking about differences between Texas and Arizona and Florida, it's vastly different. In Texas, the issues are economic and healthcare. In Arizona, where it has had staunch Republican support since Dwight D. Eisenhower, with the exception of Dole, you're talking about Mexican Americans. It's a state that has experienced a heavy influx of everyone from everywhere in the United States, making it an increasingly diverse electorate. If we're talking about Florida, that has been a staunch Republican supporter since the Reagan administration, you're having to talk about a new influx of minorities such as Puerto Ricans into a changing demographic, generational demographic of Cubans. So this is a highly heteronormative group of voters, but a very large group of voters that can have a dramatic impact for both political parties if they're not taken seriously.
Professor Sharon Novato with the Department of Political Science at UTSA, thank you so much. We appreciate you and your time with us.
Thank you.
Presidential elections date back centuries, but they weren't always as they are now. Eyewitness News reporter Vanessa Croy takes us back to 1789 for the nation's first one.
The U.S. elections have come a long way in nearly 2.5 centuries. It's hard to visualize the Electoral College, initially made up of 10 states with only 69 electors total, now nearly 8 times as large with 538 electors across 50 states. And here's how it worked. Each elector received 2 votes. The person with the majority of votes became president, and the person with the second most became vice president. And forget about political parties and massive campaigns. President George Washington was summoned to serve. Think of it as one big write-in ballot. If people saw you as a leader, you were granted the position. It was no contest in 1789. The Electoral College unanimously voted for President Washington. Vice President John Adams received 34 of the other votes. And perhaps the biggest difference between then and now, the public didn't get to vote. As late as 1816, citizens of 9 states were not able to cast a ballot. And it wasn't until November 4th, 1845, that the U.S. held its first uniform election day, meaning all states voted on the same day. Still, not all U.S. citizens were given the right to vote until 1965. That's when the Voting Rights Act was passed. That was just 55 years ago. The legislation ensured all men and women aged 21 and older, regardless of race, religion, or education, the right to vote without discrimination. A tradition continued today, where every citizen of the United States over the age of 18 has the privilege to cast a ballot. Perhaps one of the many reasons it's so important to make your voice heard in 2020. Vanessa Croy, KENS 5 Eyewitness News.
Speaking of history, this election is going to be a big part of it. With just days to go, we've already broken records across the nation and in Texas. Counties across the state have seen record early voter turnout. Let's take a look at Bexar County. More than 1,181,000 people registered to vote in the 2020 election. That's nearly 133,000 more than in 2016. And on Tuesday, voters broke the previous early voting record set in 2016. That year, just over 436,000 voters cast their ballot during the entire early voting period. The Elections Department also mailed out 116,000 mail-in ballots this year, the most in county history. The expansion of mail-in voting in some states has become one of the most debated topics in this year's presidential election. Many people, including the president, raising concerns about voter fraud. So, is it secure? David Schechter talks to an expert.
Is voting by mail secure? Politicians, experts, and probably all of your neighbors are talking about mail-in voting and whether or not it's a safe and effective way to vote. Voting by mail began during the Civil War, when both Union and Confederate soldiers could cast ballots in their home states from their distant battlefields.
It's been sort of part and parcel of elections we've for a very long time, especially uniform and overseas voters. That allowed and opened the door for really a lot of expansions in regular voters moving to vote by mail.
Voting by mail has since come a long way, accounting for 25% of total votes in 2016. Currently, 5 states have mail-in voting for all elections. Opponents of mail-in voting point to double counting, or voting on behalf of deceased people. But a recent Washington Post study of 3 vote-by-mail states found just 372 possible cases where this happened. That's a fraction of the 14.6 million votes cast by mail in the 2016 and 2018 general elections. Fraud certainly is possible, but it's not nearly as widespread as some make it out to be.
There's this constant tension in election administration right between security and access. So the more accessible we make the system, the more opportunity there is for fraud. I don't think it is widespread. I don't think there is massive amounts of mail fraud going on. But to say there's no fraud in the system is also, disingenuous.
As far as the large-scale foreign attempts at vote-by-mail fraud, the FBI have recently stated that they have not seen a coordinated fraud effort and noted how difficult such an effort would be considering the decentralized nature of U.S. elections. However, Professor Atkinson does believe the rush to expand mail-in voting this year could make the system more vulnerable.
So this really shifts things in a way that's not typical. And so, we're going to expect later ballots. Look, we've seen that, many ballots in these places have gone uncounted. There's been delivery problems of ballots to the voter as well as back to the election official. So, in states that have this down, it's not a problem, but in states that aren't used to it, it's really a big change.
Even with those concerns, Professor Atkinson believes mail-in voting is a good option this year due to COVID-19.
The circumstances are such that, we should all vote by mail as much as possible. I mean, the system is very strong, really. Election officials, work to make sure there's integrity to the system.
Campaign ads pop up every election and make some wild claims, some even false. So how do they get away with it? We verify. Plus, the pink wave, why women are running for Congress in record numbers.
Hi, Ken.
We return you to the KENS 5 Voters Guide to Election 2020.
Outside of the presidential race, several other key spots are up for grabs this election. Voters will elect a handful of local positions. They include races for Bexar County Sheriff and County Commissioners. Several state positions are also open in the Texas Senate and House of Representatives. And the same goes for the national level. Voters will decide on 1 U.S. Senate position and 7 U.S. House of Representatives seats. Out of those 8 races for U.S. Congress in our area, women are battling for 6 of the seats, but it's no coincidence. It's actually part of a movement where women across America are running for office at a record pace. Jerry Carnes explains why.
It is already a record-breaking year in politics. In fact, it's a record so impressive, it has a name, the Pink Wave. 2018 saw a record 117 women elected or appointed to Congress. This year, 583 women filed as candidates for the U.S. House, another record. More than 300 survived their primaries and will be on the November ballot.
It is some way the year of the woman or another year of the woman.
Let's explore why a growing number of women are seeking jobs in our nation's capital. Emory political science professor Andra Gillespie says it starts with recruitment. There are organizations actively seeking women who are willing to run.
Helping women feel empowered so that they take the step to run for office, and then giving them the tools to help them be able to do so. That this really is the fruit of decades of work.
The biggest gains have been with Republican women and women of color. Dr. Claire Wofford got her PhD from Emory and now teaches political science at the College of Charleston.
For women of color, I think it's less about recruitment and it's more about current events. Of course, the prominence of the Black Lives Matter movement and the activism. I don't think you can underestimate the impact of the events of the spring and summer.
Dr. Wofford says the women of color who were elected 2 years ago have inspired others to run. There are currently 127 women serving in Congress. That's almost double the 65 who were serving in the year 2000.
This year's ballot is also comprised with some important local propositions affecting the Alamo City, school districts, and surrounding communities. Let's talk about some of the most important ones. First, the future of pre-K-4 SA is at stake under the City of San Antonio's Prop A. If passed, it would renew the sales tax rate to fund the program for the next 8 years. The City of San Antonio Prop B covers new job training programs. If passed, the measure would transfer tax money from aquifer protection and parks projects to offer locals more workforce development options. And Via Metropolitan Transit also has a proposition. If passed, it would transfer money to finance public transportation starting in 2026. The funds would also be taken from aquifer protection and parks projects. Despite this, we should mention the city has already approved alternate funding for the aquifer. Next is SAISD Prop A. The proposal would fund renovations of 36 of the district's campuses, costing $1.21 billion in bonds. The district has also put forward Prop B, which would provide $90 million in bonds to upgrading technology for students. Lastly, Prop A from the city of Alamo Heights. If passed, more than $13 million in bonds would go toward improving projects along Austin Highway and Lower Broadway. Again, there is a lot at stake this election. If you haven't voted yet, check out the full list of propositions on KENS5.com/voter guide. You'll find a sample ballot that will describe each proposal so you can make your decisions before heading to the polls. You can't watch TV without seeing political ads right now. Some of you have asked whether they need to follow advertising laws and tell the truth. Liza Lucas verifies.
Call it mudslinging or a war of words. We get lots of questions about political ads. Harriet asked us whether truth in advertising laws apply to political advertisements. Let's verify with sources like the Federal Trade Commission, the Federal Communications Commission, and UGA's Dr. William Lee. To start, the truth in advertising law under the FTC requires commercial ads be truthful and not misleading. The federal law is in place to protect consumers. But what about voters?
Truth in advertising laws do not apply to political advertisements. The Supreme Court has distinguished commercial speech, that is, speech about goods and services, from political speech.
Lee says that's because most of what you hear is opinion or hyperbole, so it comes down to freedom of speech.
Any effort to regulate political advertising would run up against a very strong First Amendment tradition where the Supreme Court simply believes that debate on public issues and public people should be uninhibited, robust, and wide open. And that translates into then a lot of mudslinging.
In addition, FCC laws prohibit TV stations from refusing or censoring political ads from any legally qualified candidate. Lee says if a candidate doesn't like the way he or she's portrayed, they can respond with their own ad. So we can verify truth in advertising laws do not apply to political ads, which are pretty safely covered by the First Amendment, with a few exceptions.
A false factual statement could be subject to defamation. But again, the Supreme Court basically believes that the remedy for false statements in political speech is more speech.
Voting is your constitutional right, but some adults have to wait years before they can exercise it. A new U.S. citizen shares what it means to vote for the first time.
Now we return you to the KENS 5 Voters Guide to Election 2020.
A record number of voters are taking advantage of early voting. It's a sign of just how important this election is. And to one person, this vote is special. It's her first opportunity to contribute to the American democracy. She shares her story with our Anastasia Bolton.
What makes us American? Is it a piece of paper that says we are? Is it getting to choose who speaks for us? Is it making sure everyone gets that choice? For Amelia Barreto Carvalho, it starts with being a part of a community.
It's not because of the papers that we are American. It's a decision of really being a part of everything that we live in.
The naturalization ceremony this summer made it government official.
We decided to become citizens to be able to participate in the society that our children are growing up, in the society that we work to make it better.
The paper declaring them American gives Amelia and her husband, both originally from Brazil, the right to vote.
Elections are usually important for me because I'm a political scientist, right? But today, especially seeing everything that is going on in the country.
Today is Amelia's first time.
I'm excited. I'm not nervous yet. I might become. I'll let you know afterwards.
In she went, just an extension of what she's already been doing for 10 years, participating in her community.
Was it all you envisioned it to be? And more. There's a lot of gravitas in the process, right? So the energy inside the room, everybody really knows how important voting is for American democracy, and so you can feel that, and yeah, it was great.
What makes us American? Many opinions on that.
That's my contribution to American democracy.
For Amelia, a mom, a wife, a new citizen, and a political science teacher, it's the difference she's making in the country she now calls home.
One of the biggest accomplishments that I get is at the end of the semester or after we have an election, I have a student that comes to me and says, I voted because of this class. I'm helping this community, and that's big to me.
I'm Anastasia Bolton.
Experts are predicting election night to be different than ever before. What to expect and why we may have to wait for results. Plus, a record number of mail-in votes, an inside look at what happens after your ballot is received.
Is the KENS 5 Voters Guide to Election 2020.
Election Day is just 5 days away, but many experts warn the night may be different than in years past. We'll bring in a local political science professor to talk about why in a moment, but first we want to give you an overview about when you can expect results to start rolling in. Polls close at 7 p.m. in Texas. Usually precincts will start reporting partial results within the hour. On a national level, polls in some states are open until 9 p.m. Central Time due to the time difference. In the case of a close election, we'll have to wait on those states to get a better idea of which candidate may take the lead. As far as how soon we'll know who the next president will be, results may possibly be election night or it could be longer. Here to talk about the challenges is political science professor David Crockett at Trinity University. David, thank you so much for being here.
Good to be here.
So the pandemic means more mail-in ballots this year. How does a big increase in mail-in voting change the timing of when we'll know?
So the larger the number of mail-in ballots, the potentially longer it will be before we know, because you would need to count them if they make the difference. And so if on election night we know the number of mail-in ballots, if that number is larger than the difference between the number 1 and number 2 spaces, then we know that number is going to make the difference, and we need to count them, and that could take several days. If, however, the person in the lead is in the lead by more than the number of mail-in ballots, then that person's going to win, and we'll still count the ballots because that's what we're supposed to do, but it's not going to make a difference, and we'll know that night. We know what the battleground states are. Some of these are the usual suspects, but we also know that some states that haven't been battleground states look like they're closer than they were 4 years ago. So as those states start coming in, you can look at a short list of maybe half a dozen or a dozen states. As those states fall down on, the red or the blue column, we might get a good idea of how this is going if they tend to fall in one direction.
So I look back at 2000 with the recount dispute between Bush and Gore. Is that a possibility in this election, not just in Florida, but possibly in other states?
Yeah, definitely. Anytime it's a really, really close election, then you have the issue of a recount. Some states even have triggers where if it's within a certain difference, the recount is automatic. So it's going to depend primarily on whether those states make the difference in the presidential race overall. The reason Florida was a big deal in 2000 is because Florida was going to decide the contest in 2000. If Bush had been ahead by 70 electoral votes in 2000, we wouldn't have had to recount Florida because it wouldn't have mattered. But if we have a number of states that are really, really close this year, and those states are going to make the difference between a Biden victory and a Trump victory, then you can bet that we'll be looking at litigation and the possibility of doing recounts.
All right, David Crockett, political science professor at Trinity University, thank you so much for your insight and your time.
You're welcome.
Again, a record number of mail-in votes are expected to add to the amount of time it takes to get complete results across the nation. So let's talk about why. Election officials have rules about when they can start counting votes. It's not a process that can be done as mail-in ballots are received. Bexar County Elections Department says it sent out more than 116,000 mail-in ballots this year. The early voting ballot board could start processing and qualifying these ballots 1 week ago, marking 12 days until the election. Bexar County Elections Administrator Jackie Callanan explains the process.
So the early ballot board gets these. Once they compare the signatures, they go through an automatic envelope opener. Then the ballots are handed to another group of people, and they separate the name of the voter from the ballot. They're sitting there. They have a container here for the names, a container here for the ballots. Then another group of people take the ballots, the ballot container with the white envelope. They slit that. Then they take the ballot out.
Despite being able to start processing mail-in ballots during the early voting period, election officials cannot start tabulating the ballots until after the polls close on the last day of early voting. That is tomorrow. We should mention this process looks a bit different for smaller counties with populations under 100,000. Election officials in those counties must wait until after polls close on the last day of early voting to begin processing and qualifying ballots. These areas must also wait until polls open on Election Day to start tabulating votes. Either way, no results can be released to the public until after polls close on November 3rd. It's also important to know any results Texans learn on that day are unofficial. Election officials must check over the results by November 12th. After that, a report is sent to Governor Greg Abbott, who must review and sign off on the results, making them official. If you voted by mail, Bexar County launched a tracking tool to help you follow your ballot through this process. Just head to bear.org and follow the link that takes you to the election department's page. From there, click Track Your Mail Ballot. You'll be prompted to enter some personal information. You can track your ballot just like you would a typical package. It's free and helps give you a little peace of mind. Privacy and security are crucial to the election process. Who you vote for is always kept a secret, but your voter information is not. In Texas, anyone can request a voter's information. Most of the time, it's used by candidates to reach out to voters. The info includes your name, address, the precinct you live in, and your voter record and registration number. But other sensitive data, like your birth date and social security number, are protected. There are also exceptions to the rule. Law enforcement, judges, and crime victims can keep their info confidential. So if you've ever opened up the mailbox and found one of these from a candidate or organization, you now know how they got your voting history. It is public record. It's a point of patriotic pride. The iconic "I voted" sticker tells the world, yes, I exercised my right. Tonight, a look at the story behind the label.
The red, white, and blue, with two simple words.
Gotta do our civic duty.
The designs have changed over the years, but what's the history behind the sticker? According to various reports, including Time, businesses in Miami were giving out discounts to people wearing a sticker on Election Day as early as 1982. The stickers also reportedly showing up among teacher unions in 1984. But according to the Arizona Republic, the Phoenix Realtors Association originally invented this sticker in 1985, saying the goal was to increase voter turnout. Whatever the origin, voters are proud to don this decal of democracy.
Every vote counts. Current situation that we're all going through, I just think it's really important.
Vote means everything because we need a change in this world. Voting means that we have a choice on what goes on in our economy. So when you have that choice, make that choice.
According to some researchers, seeing these stickers can not only remind people to cast their ballot, but can actually influence people to go vote. Experts warn the race for president could be a tight one, the path to victory if the results are too close to call. Plus, presidential polls paint a preview of election night, but are they reliable? We talk to the experts.
Now we return you to the KENS 5 Voters Guide to Election 2020.
When you cast your vote, you're actually telling your state electors which candidate you want them to vote for. In the past, 5 candidates have won the popular vote from the public but did not win the Electoral College. Eyewitness News reporter Jeremy Baker explains how the process works.
Why does the United States use the Electoral College to pick the president? The Founding Fathers were split. Should Congress choose the president, or should it be left to the people? The use of electors was the solution. When you cast your vote for president, you are deciding which electors will represent your state. The number of electors in each state is determined by how many seats in Congress that state has, and that number is based on the state's population. So, for example, let's look at Texas. Every state has 2 senators, so right off the bat, that's 2 electors. Texas, the second most populous state, has 36 representatives in the House, so the Lone Star State gets 38 total electors. Whichever candidate wins Texas will get all 38 electoral votes. There are 538 total electoral votes, 535 for the states and 3 for the District of Columbia. 48 states are winner-take-all. Maine and Nebraska give 2 electoral votes to the statewide winner and 1 for the winner of each congressional district. A simple majority of 270 electoral votes is needed to win. If neither candidate gets to 270, the House of Representatives will determine the president, but each state delegation, regardless of the number of electors, must vote as one, so there are only 50 votes up for grabs. The Senate will determine the vice president with a simple majority vote of all 100 senators. The popular vote winner has lost the Electoral College in 2 of the last 5 elections. This has prompted calls to switch to a popular vote system, but that requires a constitutional amendment. Jeremy Baker, KENS 5 Eyewitness News.
Many experts are urging Americans to prepare for a contentious presidential election that could stretch past November. One of the biggest concerns, it could be too close to call. So what happens if it is? Well, there are 2 scenarios. One involves the House of Representatives, the other, the Supreme Court. As mentioned, if a candidate does not receive 270 votes from the Electoral College, then the winner will be decided by the House of Representatives. It's a pretty uncommon situation that hasn't happened since 1824. So what about the popular vote? If an election is too close to call in an individual state, the Supreme Court can step in but doesn't have to. This happened in the presidential election in 2000. Florida was critical in deciding which candidate would receive the most electoral votes, but the race was too close to call. Democrat Al Gore wanted to continue the recount, but Republican George W. Bush did not. The process was pushing up against a federal deadline, so the Supreme Court stepped in, announcing the recount was over. Bush was given the victory, and Gore conceded. So we've got the results. Now what happens if a candidate refuses to concede? We've received this question a lot, so let's talk about it. A candidate has no legal obligation to concede, but the practice is a long-standing tradition. The concession speech typically serves as a way for candidates to thank their supporters and unite the nation after a divisive election. Here's a glimpse at Hillary Clinton's speech after losing to President Trump in 2016.
We have seen that our nation is more deeply divided than we thought. But I still believe in America, and I always will. And if you do, then we must accept this result and then look to the future. Donald Trump is going to be our president. We owe him an open mind and the chance to lead. Our constitutional democracy enshrines the peaceful transfer of power. And we don't just respect that, we cherish it.
While a concession is not required, a peaceful transition of power from the previous president to the president-elect is mandated. A candidate is allowed to request a recount, but once that decision comes through, it's final. It's something that's discussed daily leading up to the presidential election. One candidate up in the polls over another. The polls ahead of the 2016 election were not the most reliable. Ben Briscoe looks into what happened and if it was a one-time fluke.
We tend to view polls as a crystal ball, a magic way to know if President Donald Trump or former Vice President Joe Biden will win the election. But remember 2016.
And now Hillary Clinton has taken a slight lead on.
Clinton is leading. She is leading where it counts.
At the national poll that shows her up by 9, another one shows her up by 14, another one shows her up by 3. It is like numbers overload.
The 2016 election was difficult for pollsters.
We learned a big lesson.
Jason Husser runs the Elon poll, and UNCG professor Hunter Bacot used to work in polling. Both say the predictions were off, but not by as much as it seems. On the morning of the election, the New York Times showed Hillary Clinton was up by 3.1%. When you look at the popular vote, she ended up winning that by 2.1%. The issue was with predicting an electoral college winner.
Where we missed them was in some of these states where I think the last election was Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan that really missed. And they really didn't miss by much. They were actually within the margin of error.
That said, a big group of pollsters got together after 2016 and tried to figure out, well, we were surprised on Pennsylvania and Michigan to some degree. What happened there?
Two big blunders. First, how pollsters pick people to question. Traditionally, the idea is to match their sample to the general public by age, gender, and race. In 2016, we also learned you need to factor in education level.
Too many people in their polls that had high levels of education. They didn't have enough folks without a college degree.
That mattered because political scientists have found President Trump's campaign used social media to target swing state voters without a college degree. So come election day, they made up 63% of all folks showing up to vote. And Pew Research says they were more likely to vote for Trump.
You're going to have much better results this go around. People are going to be much more careful.
But it's tougher to change the second polling problem.
The late-breaking voters are going to be a perpetual issue in trying to have a sense of who's up and who's down. If a poll is within, this is my rule of thumb, is within 5 points, unless a person has a lead, the last poll before the election is a lead above sort of 5+ points, I treat it as if it's really too close to call.
The way Trump got his votes was that virtually last week people were undecided and went one way. It's all about voting. I mean, the best poll you have is election day.
Can you treat polls as a crystal ball?
I believe you can. I mean, look back at all the elections, 16 was probably an outlier. And I think, and we learn as we go along.
So polls might not see the future, but they do keep your eye on the ball of who's leading at that particular point in time.
Exercising your constitutional right can have its perks. When we return, a list of freebies you can expect on Election Day.
We return you to the KENS 5 Voters Guide to Election 2020.
It's the age of social media, and platforms could be key to grabbing the attention of a younger generation of voters. The social media network TikTok is already buzzing with users encouraging others to vote. Britt Moore talks to experts who explain why the video sharing platform could play an important role in the election.
Flex your power at the polls.
We're speaking to Gen Z in their language.
You need to go vote.
Colton Hess and a team of content creators are using TikTok, the world's most downloaded app, according to Sensor Tower, to get young voters' attention ahead of the November election.
We've never been in a moment like this. Our young generation certainly hasn't, and there's no return to normal from something like this. And so I think people are starting to see, you know, we're going to decide what the new normal looks like.
New data from the Brookings Institution shows millennials and younger generations have beat out the boomers and now make up the majority of the U.S. population.
We're going to see it increase. I mean, they're already starting to vote. And in fact, they're population-wise almost to where the baby boomers are in terms of the number of them, but some are still cresting into voting age.
Political science professor Marco Lowe says grassroots campaigns like Talk the Vote will play an important role.
Social media has rewritten how we do elections.
Looking ahead, are you noticing candidates kind of shifting gears or adjusting their strategies now that we know the younger generations are making up most of the U.S. population?
I think you're seeing the Democrats focus more on the younger generation. They are typically a more progressive voting bloc, and you're seeing the social media and avenues to talk to them. By having the president attempt to ban TikTok in America is not something I would do to catch younger voters' attention.
Hess says his campaign and others will help affect change in the areas that matter most to millennials and the younger generations who are now realizing their influence.
In the past few years, social media companies have implemented new policies to combat misinformation about the election on their platforms. Many outlets are even banning political ads on their sites leading up to Election Day. TikTok also recently banned manipulated videos like deepfakes that it says could distort the truth and mislead voters. Before we wrap up for the night, it wouldn't be election season without some freebies for voters, so here's a couple of them. Grubhub is offering some free delivery and discounts on Election Day. Restaurants participating include Red Lobster, California Pizza Kitchen, and P.F. Chang's. Diners can check out the Perks tab on the app to find the deals. And Krispy Kreme is giving anyone who visits participating locations on Election Day a free original glazed donut and an I voted sticker. That's so all the people who voted by mail can show off their patriotic pride. Plus, Planet Fitness is offering to help voters work off their Election Day stress. Visitors can get a free workout and hydro massage. Lastly, Lyft and Uber also have promotions to get you to the polls on Election Day. Check out their app to find the closest polling locations and ride discounts. Keep watch of your favorite businesses on social media to find more deals. Also, be sure to visit KENS5.com/voter guide. There, you'll find everything you need to know about this year's election, including candidates, propositions, sample ballots, polling locations, and hours. You can also find more from our experts, David Crockett and Sharon Novato. Again, I'm Sharon Coe. Thank you for joining us for this special election edition of KENS 5 Eyewitness News. We hope you join us back here leading up to and on election night.